stop me. I'm making my way home. I'm making my way. I go solo, oh, I go solo. I'm making my way home. I'm making my way. Nothing's going to stop me. I'm making my way home. I'm making my way. I go solo, oh, I go solo. I'm making my way home. I'm making my way.
Maybe all I need is you. Nothing else makes a difference. Maybe all I need is you. You make all the difference. Back to the rhythm of my empty soul. Nothing here to let go. Back to the rhythm of my empty soul. Nothing here to let go. Give me something to let go. Give me something to let go. Give me something to let go. Give me As I write this down, I feel like myself when I'm on my own. And there's no one else, I can feel it. As the years go by, I am defined by the things I take and leave behind. I still walk this line.
Boa tarde a todos. A gente inicia aqui a coletiva de encerramento da trilha de finanças.
Good afternoon. We are having the press conference with Minister Haddad, President of the Brazilian Central Bank, Roberto Campos, Director of the Central Bank, Paulo Piketty, and Ambassador Tatiana Rosito. Please identify yourselves before asking your question, your name, and the institution you represent.
Boa tarde, Marcela Aires da
Good afternoon. Minister Haddad, in the last G20 meetings in April, you said that economies and markets were being affected by the changes and relaxation in the United States, monetary relaxation in the United States. Now we see greater volatility. How do you think the result of the elections can affect the G20 work, especially with regards to the tax war and the reluctance of some governments in advancing in taxation of the super rich? A question for Roberto Campos Neto. The volatility that is impacting risk premiums in Brazil, is that a concern? And to which extent do you see a potential speeding up of the monetary situation and worsening? Thank you. I will begin answering my question. I believe that, yes, there are reasons to believe that whatever is the result of the elections in the U.S. will impact and cause some change in economic policies in general, not specifically in Brazil, but it will certainly have a global impact. And judging from the candidates' declarations themselves, and also with the accommodation of the government, how will this translate into effective policies? But whatever happens will, of course, have international repercussions. And Brazil is a country that is fully connected with the rest of the world in terms of trade, services, finance, and we must be prepared for any scenario. Thank you for your question, Marcela. I believe that going back to the topic of the U.S., there are two topics, actually. One is the uncertainty whether we will have a smooth landing or not in the U.S., and the volatility of opinions has been great. We're leaving a scenario where we would not have a smooth landing. We fluctuated between a scenario without a landing with higher inflation, but we understand that today we have a smooth landing prospect. Another point related to the elections, when we look at the candidates and both the Democrats and the Republicans, they bring three dimensions. One is related to migration, another with fiscal expansion, and the third is regarding protectionism. And all three raise inflation. Migration because of a stricter labor market, the protectionism. So you have these three aspects that raise inflation. And as elections come up, this will certainly impact prices in the market. Now, the risk volatility, we have seen a rise in the long-term rates and the implicit rates, and we have been addressing that. We understand that we will have some announcements in the short term addressing, at least in part, the market's reaction to the fiscal topic. And with regards to the interest rates, we have left the guide to what to do open because we don't think it is proper to focus on that because it might bring a negative or pessimistic reaction. So we decided to wait, sit back and wait to announce our guidance. You will know about this in the following weeks, and we will give all the explanations as transparently as possible.
Stand up. Oh, just stand up to make the question.
Boa tarde a todos. Obrigada por aceitarem.
Good afternoon. I am Aline Bronzatti from the O Estado agency. Just a follow-up about the fiscal aspect. The urgency for fiscal consolidation was one of the highlights in the annual meetings, and you mentioned this in the different appointments. How do you see Brazil in this regard relatively to the world? And has Mr. Campos Neto produced a diagnostic or given Mr. Haddad any clues about the expense package that Brazil needs to reach in order to convince the bank with regards to taxes? No, I think this should be answered by the minister, and I do not give clues. Actually, we do talk about the economic scenario, and the important part is not what the bank expects. The tax part is important for the central bank because it does impact our macroeconomic variables, and it is part of our framework, the variables that influence our decision-making. So Only in this regard is it relevant for the central bank. And that's why we mention it sometimes, because we have to explain our function and our reaction in a transparent way to the market. I believe that all my answers to this question have been very transparent. And with regards to what I imagine for the Brazilian economy is the strengthening of a decision that has already been made. Last March, when after presenting to all of the economic area and to the central bank the design of our tax framework. So in my view, it's not a matter of reformulating, just reinforcing or ensuring the economic agents, workers, businessmen, investors in general, that those terms and parameters are credible to the mid and long term. So, and this is how I treat the tax issue, considering the measures that are necessary to reinforce and strengthen the parameters that have been approved by the National Congress and by the executive branch, and which are part of what I see as part of the sustainability of Brazilian public finance. So I believe in these parameters, and if we need to strengthen them, this is the path we will take, because it is a position that was established last year. Strengthening them or reinforcing them is just strengthening a decision that has already been made. Your second question, or a second part of your question that I did not answer. One of the conclusions of the IMF began in Marrakesh is that the global agenda was rising too much, that the world has faced COVID very well, but that it was too expensive. It came at a very high cost, and that the world would have to address this sooner or later. And when we look at what the countries produce, Brazil is above average. I have been talking about that. I think that the market prices are a little too exaggerated now.
Murphy from Bloomberg. I wanted to ask about China. And as you know, China is midway of rolling out its biggest stimulus since the pandemic, but we still don't know what the physical spending or the physical amount will be. So I'd like to ask you, what's your assessment of China's recent measures to boost its economy, and what should the focus of any fiscal spending be, perhaps? We noted that Chinese officials this week haven't made any public announcements here during the meetings. Obviously, you just mentioned transparency. Why do you think this might be the case? Is there some reluctance for them to express and sort of communicate the sort of thinking behind their economic stimulus, given that it is the world's second largest economy? Thank you.
We are monitoring the evolution of the Chinese economy in a vigilant manner, because they are Brazil's major trade partner, although Brazil is very balanced in its relations with other important regions of the world, the European Union, the U.S., and South America. There is a set of measures that are being considered, but not so much announced by the Chinese officials. Recently, we went to China recently with a delegation of Brazilian economic officials, and one of the reasons was to get a better understanding of their economic prospects. And on the other hand, we want to straighten our relationships with regards to trade, investment, and finance. So our diplomatic position is multilateral, and it accepts and includes trade partnerships very strongly. And President Lula's attitude has been not to choose a priority partner, but exactly to have developed closer bonds with the major economic blocs. I went to the White House 2 days ago and to discuss this. And I mentioned that in President Lula's first bilateral meeting with President Biden and their teams, one of the wishes expressed by Brazil was to explore the possibility of connecting our productive structures and our development plans with the Inflation Reduction Act here, trying to explore specificities of both plans, the American and the Brazilian, such as the Brazilian plan for ecological transformation and the new industry plan for Brazil, so that our value chains can be more integrated between the countries. Also, efforts with the European Union, especially France, which resists the Mercosur-Europe agreement, also in the sense of trying to improving our ties with them. So I want to make it clear that although there might be some insecurity about the stimulus measures that China may take, Brazil is still exploiting all the possibilities and alternatives we have ahead of us.
No. Business Day from Johannesburg.
Yeah, my name is Boniface Ihelsota from Excel Magazine International, Washington, D.C. How will G20 countries address global economic challenges? And my second question is, how will peace and stability be promoted through this unit?
Stability. Como é que vai endereçar os grandes problemas de crescimento e a estabilidade?
Quer começar?
Actually, this is not a topic that is exclusive to the G20. Maybe the financial track of the G20 was created exactly because of the international turmoils in 2008 and other such situations. And the measures, the group's attitude and the measures that were taken, such as the creation of the FSB and others, were to bring more stability. And if I understand my colleagues today during the ministerial meeting when we celebrated the 25 years of the financial track, we are all very comfortable with the fact that in a certain sense, the finance track has fulfilled its mission to create, with all those 27 countries, overcoming the crisis of 2008 and the pandemic in 2019 and improve the effects in the economy in general. And all the colleagues reminded us and remembered during the meeting that these challenges that were somehow overcome will still be present in the future, and they may be as challenging as all the latest ones. So there is a very extensive reforms agenda that involves not only the G20, but the OECD, the UN system, in the sense of seeking instruments to bring balance. And the communique today was also a consensus. All the multilateral development banks have aligned themselves around a common agenda so that they can become better, bigger, more effective to face these challenges, especially considering the low-income countries and the indebted low-income countries that need new instruments for financial sustainability and also to face climate change, which we know now will clearly impact the poorer countries. So I consider that this is the top priority for the G20, and Brazil is very happy with the results of the 2 communiques that were approved by consensus as usual, and which reflect our intentions as announced in the end of 2023 when we took on the presidency of the group.
Business Day in Johannesburg. Brazil hands over the chair of the G20 to South Africa on the 1st of December. And I was wondering what agenda items do you as Brazil, and specifically as the finance track, want to see South Africa pick up and run with? And also, what do you see as the role for the finance track to promote the interests of emerging markets globally? And what can and should South Africa be doing as it takes over? Thanks.
Olha, o discurso inaugural da África do Sul.
South Africa's inaugural speech was very adherent to the agenda that it will receive from Brazil today. Actually, the speech was very satisfactory with regards to continuity of the work looking forward by the G20, all aligned with what Brazil tried to do when it received the presidency from India and the agenda. So I believe that with the announcement of South Africa's priorities, none of the topics that are dear to Brazil will be away from this agenda. And of course, they will try to bring their own, bring their own character and mark. They might bring up new problems and issues and solutions, but nevertheless, I believe that the Brazilian agenda will be preserved and maybe even deepened, as is expected. We also touched upon topics and agendas, especially the multilateral development banks that are not especially or specifically from G20, but which would deepen the international cooperation. I refer to the OECD's agenda, which many countries, and they have been demanding from the countries to implement the OECD agenda, which impacts the market and the countries in general, and which would be a very important gateway for the OECD or another multilateral entity to include in its agenda more ambitious proposals. So Brazil's proposal on the taxation of rich individuals, for example, was incorporated by South Africa with great transparency, but we do not believe that a presidency of a different country will change anything in the implementation of this measure. And we have been taking years to deal with pillars 1 and 2. And if we really want to provide more effective answers to global problems, the speeding up of the implementation is something that was brought up by many countries in the last session.
I think the word was trying to establish continuation, so not create a lot of new objectives, but to continue on the objectives that have been created and we have been working on. And I would divide that in 4 sectors, in 4 parts. One is financial sector issues. And on that, we have the cross-border initiative that is very important, and we need to go further on that. Today, we are working on a governance to create a taxonomy for cross-border payments. We are also looking at the overseeing of some of the infrastructure on that. On the tokenization, artificial intelligence, also there is a group studying that, and I think we plan to evolve on that. And also on the roadmap for crypto assets. The second part is international finance architecture. And here we had continued to debate the CBDCs, the digital currencies, how that can influence the capital flows to emerging market countries, and how can we diminish the barriers by implementing better strategies. The third group was sustainable finance, and I don't have time to go over everything, but it's basically an implementation related to the sustainability reporting standards, and we have a lot of challenges on that. And the final one was the financial inclusion agenda. And here we understand that everybody welcome the definition of financial well-being that we worked on, and there is a general agreement on working more on how that's going to develop, and also on options to improve the last mile in terms of the quality of people going into the financial inclusion. And also develop a plan action for the financing of less developed economies through innovation and through creating market structures that can facilitate that. Thank you.
Boa tarde, Larissa Garcia da.
Good afternoon, Larissa Garcia, Manai Agency, for the President of the Central Bank and for Director Paulo. The cycle of an increase in interest rates, what is being said, and the focus is not enough to put inflation targets for the Monetary Policy Council projections. But even then, the focus is not involved very much. The market is not really believing that the central bank is going to be doing whatever is needed to put inflation targets back on track. So why do you not, central bank, correct this in your discourse to put the market pricing in the right place and being direct? Will the Monetary Policy Council increase the rates up until the projection is in target above of what the focus is? A question to the minister now. Along the same lines, I want to ask about inflation targets. A few analysts have been asking the viability of having a low inflation target, because with our fiscal adjustments today, the goal penalizes very much the country in terms of monetary restrictions. So in order to sort this out in the medium run, you want to increase the inflation target, since the framework has seemed to be insufficient to keep inflation in 3% without having too much of a restraint. Thank you.
Larissa, só detalhe que isso
Larissa, this is a G20 press conference. I understand your question. Yeah, but we need to be focusing on the G20. I will answer your questions as quick as I can. We have other people willing to know about the G20 related topics. But in relation to your question, the central bank doesn't only work with a thermometer of what the market pricing is. The central bank has internal models, internal projections. The central bank looks at inflation rates throughout research, and we now have a research with the private sector, not just market agents. So we have many instruments that we look at. And what we have been saying repeatedly many times is that central bank is focused on obtaining the goal, the converging to the target, meaning we'll do whatever it takes to reach the target. So if we at some point do see a difference in market pricing, sometimes the focus report gets away from what the market understands to be the reality. Once again, we look at everything we discuss with the meetings. The meetings are based on technical criteria, and this is what I can respond to your question. Minister, please. Well, the improvement that the government would like to propose for changing the inflation targets was done in common agreement with the central bank along this time. We were able to consolidate this in an actual executive order enacted mid this year, which was valid ever since mid last year. And so we understand that the continuous target was an important improvement, even celebrated by the actual makers of the inflation target program publicly. And we understand that this improvement is enough to making assessments about the proper way of reaching the target to be considered by the directors of the central bank, who are autonomous to do so. Daniel, AFP.
much. I just wanted to ask about the COP next month in Baku. Following your meeting this morning, what are you hoping to achieve next month? More specifically, what level beyond 100 billion do you think would be a good target for the NCQG, the new collective quantified goal? And if I may, on taxation, what do you make of the discussions here about steps taken to tax the super rich, and what concrete efforts are you hoping for from South Africa when it takes over the presidency later this year?
Olha, eu até perguntei para a Tatiana.
I asked Tatiana if this has been the object of some meeting, a bilateral meeting or something specific of the G20, but the topic was never debated in the plenaries of the G20 nor in bilateral talks. But what we're trying to print in the parallel talks to the G20, which I'm now having Minister Marina Silva bilateral meeting, but to look for innovative instruments to leveraging resources for funding ecological transformation and environmental services for the maintenance of tropical forests. It's called the TFFF, Tropical Forest Finance Facility, which has been gaining momentum in the last few weeks, including in an article that's been published by myself, Marina, and the president of the World Bank. This has been also mobilized non-governmental organizations so this money is not properly donation, but money that when it is reloaned, it can lead to a spread that can pay for the financing of environmental services. So this topic has not been dealt with in the plenaries, but it has been dealt with in their own arenas. But there is leeway for at the COP29 and COP30, which will be presided by Brazil, this topic can rise and be approved. Minister Marina Silva has been quite emphatic when she says that the discussions about climate change, about impact, they are done and over with. Everyone knows. And it's in front of our eyes. We are all sick and tired of knowing that climate change has produced and provoked impact. Brazil has been particularly affected, actually this year, both with the floods in Rio Grande do Sul, as well as with the drought in the Pantanal and the Amazon and Middle West region of the country. So we need to look for ways into preserving the ecological collection so as to preserve some resistance to climate change, which is already happening. And Marina has been very emphatic in saying that COP30 is the limit date for a decision-making, for a position, for action in regards to funding climate change. So at the G20, this was not specifically discussed, except in the parallel talks that, always occur whenever we have an opportunity to advance new mechanisms of funding.
Because we have to quit the room, so Thierry, please stand up and introduce yourself.
Obrigado. Thierry Augier de Latin Finance. Sobre o G20, perguntar sobre
About the G20, we are here at the IMF. G20 just around the corner. In the Rio summit, in a scenario of a lot of geopolitical uncertainty, 2 wars ongoing, Ukraine, Middle East, Gaza, China coming up as well with an uncertainty with U.S. elections. This will be the most volatile meeting, or volatile and uncertainty, a G20 meeting ever since the 2008, which we also had a meeting at the IMF in 2008. So how did you speak about those issues, about strong volatility during this period with the G20? And how are you dealing with that? Well, thanks so much for your question. I think that usually, and in the last few years, we have always said that it's hard to come to a meeting like this with a global ease in general scenario, so to speak. But we have been following this as a sequence. But on the other hand, this has always been a reality that the market has reacted better to the crises than expected. If we go back to a few G20 country meetings, like when Ukraine was hit, we imagined that there would be a rupture in terms of commercial and trade than we actually had. If you look at the Middle East, we would expect the oil prices would be much higher than they are, in fact. So yes, it is true that we did have sequential crises, and we need to look at things in a structuring way on how to make economy grow with productivity, with a challenge to pay a high debt, and with a challenge of generating equality. So this is a recurring topic, and this will happen regardless of the crisis. But let me emphasize that, yes, we did have many crises, but in general, the market has behaved better than we expected in face of the crises. Thanks. Well, I share Roberto's diagnosis, although I do recognize that effectively there has been a harshening of the risks regarding these topics, and they require more attention. Ever since 2008, we're going through a situation that is quite different. There, we hadn't had any crisis. When the 2008 crisis eroded, there hadn't been any crisis like there for many decades. And I think the 2008 is still unfolding. We have not sorted out the 2008 crisis to date. The way I see things, we are going to see the political unfoldings of what came to be called the new liberalism crisis, which occurred in 2008. Both left-wing and right-winged thinkers believe like that, and the unfoldings are still coming, which have not been fully overcome, and that including they can be called back as new episodes of lack of stability occur. So we must do with much care. Brazil has been trying a lot to look for dialogue with several other players to try and address the solutions which will allow us to overcome these obstacles that we face. That's it. Thanks.